The alarm did not sound like an alarm. It sounded like the whole sky had cracked open. I was standing on the roof of a concrete bunker outside Denver, my hands frozen on the controls of an old anti-aircraft gun, when the shadow of an alien carrier passed over the ruined skyline. 3 days earlier, that shadow would have meant the end of everything. 3 days earlier, nothing we owned could scratch their ships. My name is Elena Voss. I was a sergeant in what was left of the Colorado defense line, and I was about to fire the first shot that would change the entire war. The Kalthari Dominion arrived without warning. Their ships did not look like machines. They looked like drops of liquid metal frozen in the shape of arrows, gliding through the atmosphere without sound, without heat, without mercy. Every nation on Earth sent everything we had against them in the first hours. Fighter jets, missile cruisers, orbital platforms that had taken decades to build. None of it mattered. Their hulls simply did not break. Our pilots described watching missiles strike dead on target and simply slide off, as if the metal itself was laughing at us. Within 2 days, 3 of our largest fleets were gone, not destroyed in the way you would expect, with fire and wreckage scattered across the sky. They were disabled, engines silenced, and calmly pulled into the belly of Kalthari transport ships, like fish caught in a net. Our commanders stopped calling it an invasion and started calling it a harvest. I was not a scientist. I was not a general. I was a soldier who had spent years training on equipment everyone said was outdated, forgotten leftovers from wars fought only between humans. Old anti-aircraft guns, radar systems built for shooting down jets, not starships, depleted stockpiles of shells that were supposed to have been melted down for scrap years ago. Nobody thought they mattered anymore. Nobody thought we would ever need them again. On the 3rd day, headquarters gave an order that sounded almost like a joke. Every remaining anti-aircraft unit was to hold position and wait for low-altitude Kalthari activity. Nobody expected results. We were told to think of it as a delay, a way to slow the invaders down, while real weapons were prepared. I remember laughing bitterly at that word, real weapons, as if the gun under my hands was somehow less real than the starships tearing our cities apart. Then the carrier came low. It was deploying landing pods over what remained of downtown Denver, dropping altitude to release smaller vessels into the ruins. That was its mistake. It flew directly into the range of our defense line, a line the Kalthari sensors had apparently mistaken for old farming equipment. I still do not know if that mistake saved us, or if it simply gave us our first real chance. The order came through my headset, calm and almost disbelieving. Free fire authorized. All units engage. I pulled the trigger. What happened next did not look like victory. It looked like desperation given a shape. Hundreds of anti-aircraft batteries across the valley opened fire at once, filling the sky with a storm of shells, thousands of small impacts every second, an endless wave of metal thrown upward with no elegance and no hesitation. It was the opposite of everything the Kalthari understood about combat. Their doctrine was built around single powerful strikes, focused energy against focused shielding, one beam meeting one barrier in a contest of strength. They had never faced an enemy who simply refused to stop throwing more. I watched through my scope as the carrier's surface, the same surface that had shrugged off missiles and energy weapons without a mark, began to change. Small dents, small fractures. The Kalthari called their armor the unbroken skin, a living metal that repaired itself instantly against any single point of damage. But it was never designed to repair 100,000 tiny wounds at once. Every impact forced its systems to divide attention, spreading thin, falling behind. For the first time since the invasion began, I heard something other than silence from the enemy. A tremor ran through the ship, a visible shudder in its smooth hull, and then a thin plume of vapor began leaking from one of its thruster housings. The armor there was thinner, built to deflect debris and dust, never meant to withstand a storm of dedicated fire. Our spotters screamed over the radio, not in fear this time, but in something close to joy. The carrier began to climb, awkward and unstable, venting gas from a wound no larger than a dinner plate, yet it was enough. It turned away. It retreated. It was the first Kelthari vessel in the entire war to leave a battlefield without finishing what it started. I sat there afterward, hands shaking, ears ringing, staring at the empty sky where the ship had been. I did not feel like a hero. I felt like someone who had just discovered a crack in something everyone believed was perfect. News of that battle spread faster than any official broadcast could carry it. Within hours, every surviving unit on the continent knew that the impossible had happened. Within a day, the story had crossed oceans. People who had given up hope found themselves standing in scrapyards, dragging old anti-aircraft weapons out of storage, welding parts together with whatever scraps of metal city workers could find. It was not organized. It was not elegant. It was human beings refusing to accept that the fight was already over. A man named Daniel Whitfield, an engineer who had spent his life restoring old military vehicles as a hobby, became one of the unlikely leaders of that effort. I met him 3 weeks after the battle at Denver, in a repair yard outside a town that no longer had a name on any map. He showed me rows of automated cannons, rebuilt from parts scavenged out of decommissioned naval ships, guns designed decades earlier to knock missiles out of the sky. He told me something I never forgot. He said the Kelthari had spent 10,000 years learning how to fight wars between equals, ship against ship, shield against blade. They had never learned how to fight against a species that simply would not stop. Within a month, our strategy shifted entirely. We stopped trying to match the invaders in single powerful weapons, and instead focused on numbers, density, and endurance. Every city built defensive rings of anti-aircraft batteries, some modern, most scavenged from a century of forgotten wars. Our factories, the ones still standing, shifted entirely toward producing simple ammunition instead of complicated new technology. It turned out that raw industrial capacity, something humanity had built for over 100 years without ever imagining it would face an alien invasion, was exactly what the Kelthari had never prepared for. Their commanders adapted quickly, I will give them that. Ships began flying higher, staying outside the range of our weapons, launching precision strikes from a distance, instead of descending into our defensive zones. For a while, it worked. We lost ground, we lost people. But it also meant they could no longer land troops as easily, could no longer deploy their forces close to the ground without risking exposure to our fire. The invasion, once smooth and unstoppable, began to slow. I was reassigned to help train new defense crews across what remained of the western states. I met soldiers who had never fired a weapon before the invasion, farmers and teachers and delivery drivers, who now spent their days learning to track alien flight patterns on radar screens, built from spare parts. A young woman named Grace Whitmore, barely out of school, became one of the best gunners under my command, calm under pressure, in a way that surprised everyone who had known her before the war. She told me once that she never imagined herself as a soldier, but she also never imagined giving up. 6 months into the resistance, the Kelthari attempted their largest assault yet, sending a coordinated wave of ships toward what remained of our industrial centers, trying to end the war in one decisive strike before our defenses could grow any stronger. It was the battle that decided everything. I remember standing beside Daniel Whitfield in the command center that night, watching dozens of ships appear on radar, more than we had ever faced at once. For a moment, I thought this was the end, that all our effort had simply delayed the inevitable. But then I looked around the room, at the operators calmly calling out coordinates, at the crews already moving into position across a defense grid that stretched farther than anything we had built before. The battle lasted 11 hours. I will not pretend it was easy or without cost. We lost defenses. We lost people we had trained beside for months. But when the sun rose over what remained of that industrial valley, the Kelthari fleet had withdrawn entirely, retreating beyond orbit for the first time since the war began. It was not a total victory. It was something better. It was proof that they could be stopped. The peace talks came 4 months later, held in a location that felt strange for something so historic. An old airfield hangar, patched together with the same scavenged metal we had used to build our defenses. I was invited, not because I held any political power, but because I was the soldier who had fired that very first shot outside Denver, the moment that started everything. Their translator, a calm synthetic voice, speaking through careful pauses, asked me a question I still think about. She asked why humanity had never developed advanced shielding, or elegant energy weapons, or any of the refined technology every other species in the galaxy considered essential for warfare. I told her the truth. We never had the luxury. Our history was built on conflict between ourselves. Wars fought with whatever was available, whatever was affordable, whatever could be built quickly and in enormous numbers. Nobody ever gave us the chance to build anything graceful, because survival never allowed for grace. She did not have an answer to that. I do not think the unbroken skin ever did either. Standing there, looking out at the wreckage and the rebuilding happening around us, I understood something that no strategist or scientist had predicted. The Kael'thari had spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of war between equals. We had spent barely a century learning how to survive against everything, including ourselves. In the end, it was not our weapons that saved us. It was our stubborn, unglamorous refusal to stop fighting, one shell, one impact, one small crack at a time, until something the galaxy called unbreakable finally gave way.